And everyone, welcome back to the Monarchs Tribunal. Returning is none other than my first guest of this show, Bill Tucker of A Gamer Looks at 40.
Hey, what's going on, man? Thanks for having me back.
Whereas last time, me and Bill here talked about what we thought was the best of the Super Nintendo RPGs, Chrono Trigger or Final Fantasy VI. Today, the idea is more, we're going to be talking Majora's Mask. But both me and you
Yes.
kind of came into this game at a different time.
Totally. We did.
Now, I know you did a bunch of shows a while back that I still need to watch about Majora's Mask.
That's all good.
So, when exactly did you finally play this one?
I finally played Majora exactly 2 years ago for the Zelda series on my show. That's actually a bit of a lie. I played it for about maybe an hour when it first hit the Wii. When I downloaded on the Wii Virtual Console, I guess that must have been like 2008 maybe or so. Just because, I like Ocarina just fine, but I've never played Majora. I didn't really connect with it. I didn't like the time travel, not time travel, but the time loop stuff. And I don't know, it was just a weird game for me. So I kind of put it down pretty quick. And then I realized I need to play it for the Zelda series on my podcast. So that was the first time I really played it, and I absolutely fell in love. It rocketed to my top 3 in Zelda, and it vacillates between like 3 and 4, depending on the day. But yeah, it quickly skyrocketed for a number of reasons, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yeah. I played this really close to launch. So I still remember getting it, and it came with the expansion pack, which was so weird to see on a console, an expansion pack.
Yeah.
But you needed it to play Majora's Mask because of RAM issues, I think it was. Is that what the expansion pack expanded on?
Yep, it expanded the onboard RAM by a whopping 4 megabytes, if memory serves. A whole 4 megabytes. It increased the RAM of the N64. I believe that's right. But yeah, it was required to play it. And there was a few games that were required for it as well, but that was one of them.
For you youngins, that is a lot of RAM back in the day.
It really was. I mean, my first Packard Bell computer had 4 megs of RAM, to which I then upgraded to a whopping 20, and that was like, whoa, you got 20 megs of RAM in your 486 computer, Windows 3.1? That's amazing. But yeah, so that was a pretty big deal, and a lot of games of that era allowed you to pick whether you wanted like high graphics mode or low graphics mode. Which, when you think about it, in N64 era, which was late 90s, early 2000s, I'm right on that, right? Yes, like late 90s. That was wild. Like, you didn't see that on consoles. Do you want high graphics or mediocre graphics? And that was an option on a lot of games if you didn't have the expansion pack.
Man, I still remember being blown away that the controller would rumble.
The controller rumble, people don't realize how amazing that was. In that, yeah, I remember it was a huge marketing thing too for the N64, the rumble pack. You had the game saving, which was weird for an N64 because it was a cartridge-based system. So why can't you just save on the actual cartridge? It's not a CD. But it was cool because it allowed you to save onto an external device and then go to your friend's house. But the big thing, of course, was always that rumble pack. And it was really innovative. And now you can't imagine, a controller without rumble on it. It just seems like natural. But back in the day, it was a really big deal to have that thing shaking when you were, accelerating in Star Fox 64. It was really cool.
Man, even cheap knockoff controllers these days are going to have rumble.
Yeah, it's almost required at this point for any controller is going to have some sort of rumble functionality.
Yeah, contrary to you, when you first played it, I loved this game the moment I picked it up. Like, there wasn't even any hesitation or doubt in my mind. It's like, this is the best one ever made! Within, like, the first hour of that game.
What about it caught you like that?
I know we talked about this a little bit on your show, but
For
early
those who
on,
haven't seen it,
yeah, you'll hear us talk about like Final Fantasy and whatnot over on his podcast. But I brought up there when we talked a bit about Final Fantasy VI. It's like there was a certain time frame where I started to realize the really darker atmospheres in a game really started to draw me in at a certain point. I think it's around Majora's Mask where I really started to realize that. It was so much of a darker tone than the previous Zelda games.
Totally. So even the opening moments where you're kind of wandering through the forest on Epona and you're no longer this conquering hero. And within like 10 minutes, you lose your horse, you lose your shield and your sword. You're in a place where no one knows who you are. It is a complete disempowerment. Complete. And nothing feels quite right. Everything feels off, which is a really great place to be for a Zelda game. When the original Ocarina was, classic hero tale, right? Classic hero tale. And in Majora, you really are knocked down a peg or 5, and it's pretty great for that.
Wow, I had a thought in my head there. It just went completely blank.
That's okay. The magic of editing. That's why we do this. It's totally fine.
I think this is the first time though with Zelda we saw like an almost direct repeat of the game's like actual gameplay from Ocarina. Your control scheme was
No, it is, and so yeah. So structurally and from a gameplay perspective, you're right. It's just retashing the Ocarina, which makes sense because this was made only a year after Ocarina. They had maybe a year to develop this. So they had to reuse assets. They had to reuse the gameplay, and they really did. And that's actually fine. So this makes it a really almost like a true sequel in that there's so much Ocarina DNA in there. So if you like the Ocarina gameplay, then you'll enjoy this, and if you didn't, then you won't. But this one does so much more with the storytelling and the theming, and it's just does so much more with that engine than an Ocarina does.
See, one thing I do love, like while I did say the mechanics are basically all the same, it still makes it feel very different with one of the things it does separate it mechanically, the masks. Specifically the transformation masks.
I love the masks so much. They're so good. Those transformation masks look painful. Like that is some legitimate, like scary Halloween horror stuff going on when they puts on the Deku mask and his face is stretching. That is not a fun experience putting those masks on for Link, which again is cool. Again, it lends this vibe of something is not quite right here in Clocktown or in this world.
Now, for you, just out of curiosity, which one was your favorite of the masks to transform?
Man, let me pull up a list. I got of the transforming masks.
Yeah.
The ones where he like mooshes his face around.
Yeah, Zora, Deku.
Zora, Deku, and then the Goron one, right? Was there a Goron one?
There was.
Okay, I seem to like the Deku one was the first one, which I did the most. Although they're all pretty great. I think I like the Zora one the best. You mean from like a functional standpoint, or from just like this looks like it really hurts, pain, cool story?
Any really like. The only one I didn't like playing as often was the Deku Scrub.
Yeah, it's hard to. It's really you can't do much as a Deku Scrub. You really don't. That's probably the least fun one. I think I enjoyed the Zora because I think the Zora had a swimming mechanic where you could like swim really well and all that. Yeah, that was made traversing water fun. So, and the Goron one I believe allowed you to turn into that rolling boulder.
Yeah,
which I found really hard to control. Like I found that really tricky to control, especially towards the end of the game where you have to do that. In certain areas at the very, very tail end of the game, you need to be pretty slick at that, and I found that really tricky. That could have just been my emulation, that could have been my Steam Deck, I don't know, but so I think the Zora one probably was my favorite.
It quite likely had a lot to do with emulation. N64 emulators struggle.
Yeah, and I think they do, and I think it's a control thing as well. I suspect, and that's kind of what I chalked it up to. I just remember having a really hard time getting that precision that the game required. And I feel like if it was a one-to-one analog, N64 controller, it would have been much, much better. But I made it through.
Okay, it was so weird when I tried emulating some of the 64 games prior or even just playing them off the Switch. That 64 controller is so weird. Just trying to map that to a different controller doesn't
Yeah.
feel right.
It doesn't feel right because you can't replace that analog feel. But I gotta say, as the N64 controller, people bag on it all the time. People in our circle, we have some staunch N64 haters out there in our circle, and I never minded that controller. I never minded the. I thought it was neat and innovative. I think it was something that Nintendo's very good at creating things that developers don't use. They're really good at saying, here's this really cool thing you can do, and then nobody uses it. Like, hey, you could have 3 different hand positions on this N64 controller. And no, I think maybe 4 games allows you to use it like in the traditional left hand, right hand stick. I don't think any game allows you to do right hand on the thumb stick, left hand on the control pad. I don't think that's a thing. All of them were left hand on the stick, right hand on the buttons. But was that just this Nintendo saying, "Hey, try this"? And it's like, oh no, we're not going to.
I can kind of see
weird.
why. It's because if you have your left hand like on that third arm, I'm going to call it, where the D-pad is.
Yep.
How are you reaching the Z button?
Can't. Exactly. You just can't. Which basically makes it good for like Tetris. That's basically all that's good for. And I'm sure there's a game out there that uses it well and it's probably fine, but I think the N64 controller actually is quite good. And I always felt great. I never had a single problem with it. I have not used it recently, and when I go to conventions and I play an N64 game on an original controller, it breaks my brain. Like my brain has evolved past that. But that doesn't mean the controller itself is inherently bad. It just means I have to get used to it again. That's not a fault of the controller. I haven't done single stick FPSs in 25 years, right? It's not the game's fault. So I don't know. I like the N64 controller. Playing it as a young person, I never had an issue with it. I think it's perfectly fine, and it's Nintendo just doing weird Nintendo stuff, which is great.
Yeah, the struggle I had trying to play any of the 64 Zeldas, just at least via the Switch, it's the mapping of the C buttons.
That's hard.
That weird
That's hard.
feeling yellow joystick thing.
Yep.
What do you even call that?
They are the
really
directional buttons. I mean, it's just their little directional buttons. Yeah, it's weird. It's
not
very
a D-pad.
weird. It's not a pad, right? It's not a pad. They're discrete. They're discrete. I think were they C buttons or was that the C stick? I know the GameCube had the C stick. They were actually, I can't remember if they were actually called like C buttons or just directional buttons.
I think they call them C buttons because on the GameCube it was just a normal joystick down there.
So it's because the GameCube was the C stick and those were the C buttons on the N64. Yes.
Yeah.
So I think what makes it interesting as discrete buttons, they probably again were thinking fighting games, and this is me just guessing because if you look at the N64 controller, those 6 buttons, if you don't count those C buttons as like a C controller, that's just a 6-button controller. That's just a 6-button controller, right? Like that's kind of what that is. I wonder if they were thinking fighting games, but then again, you still have the left-right triggers. I don't know what they were thinking. GameCube controller is great though. I love the GameCube controller. I really do. I think it's solid. I love the fact that the buttons are different shapes, so you don't have to look at it. It's like very, very smart, very elegant.
Overall, I didn't mind. That said, all of my friends looked at me weird because I got one of those Mad Catz controllers. I don't know if you've ever had a Mad Catz controller.
I never had a Mad Catz controller. My family was very good about if we needed new stuff, we got Nintendo stuff. Like they were really good about making sure that we didn't have the Mad Catz stuff. So I never had them. I had friends who had a lot of Mad Catz stuff, and that was what I was always stuck with when we went to their house. Because it was always like, you're the third player in the game, you're gonna get the clear controller where the triggers don't work, and you're kind of just stuck with the junky one. I've lived that experience trying to play GoldenEye, on a tiny little 3-inch by 3-inch square with a junky Mad Catz controller. I have lived that life.
See, the reason I got weird looks, I liked the Mad Catz controller.
Okay, that's cool.
I don't know why, but it was just bigger, heavier. It had more weight to it. It felt like I was actually holding something. I couldn't stand the lighter regular controllers after I used the Mad Catz.
That's fair. That's super fair. Yeah, I think I had and again, I really quality varies, actually. Obviously, I never owned one myself, so I was more used to the lighter feel. But yeah,
Oh, their
no, some of those
quality's
Mad Catz
terrible.
controllers. Oh no, I mean some of
They
those
break down so
grinding wheels were
fast.
great.
That's why I hate it. It's like, I want the controller, but it's going to break down faster than the regular one. And it's going to start costing more money to keep replacing the Mad Catz. But yeah, everyone looked at me funny when we played a multiplayer game. Like, I'll take the Mad Catz controller. Like, you're volunteering for that?
Why would you do such a crazy thing? Why would you do such a senseless thing? But yeah, that's pretty cool, man. But back to Majora, man. I mean, it was no, it's fine. It's totally fine. I go on digressions. Majora, though, I think it's a fascinating story that they were able to get this game together and just use the bones of Ocarina to create a brand new experience that was so much richer from a story perspective. I mean, some of those moments in Majora still hit extremely hard. Even those side quests and whatnot. It's a weird game that couldn't have existed almost, but I'm really glad it does. It's a top 3, like I said, for me. It's probably number 3 or 4 on my list.
What are the ones that beat it out for you, out of curiosity?
No, that's fine. Breath of the Wild is my favorite. I know and maybe that's recency biased. I have not played Tears of the Kingdom, but Breath of the Wild is a singular experience that scratches all of my gameplay itches for me personally, because of the exploration, the idea of you can see something in the distance and go there and there's something cool. I really adore Breath of the Wild, and I've played almost all the Zelda games at this point. Number 2 on that list would be Link's Awakening, because I think it's just such a unique, wonderful experience, and it's quick. And I've not played the Switch remake. I've only played the original DX version. And then number 3 would either be Majora or Link to the Past. And again, those two will trade off depending on the day. Without
going too much into Breath of the Wild, I'll just say I do like it, but I think I respect it in what it did more than I actually enjoyed it.
That's fair. It's a very much so a me game. I'm a big Fallout fan. I'm a big fan of wandering and finding and discovering, and the fact that Breath of the Wild always has something cool on the horizon, or there's always something to divert your attention elsewhere, is a great gameplay itch for me. And I also played it during a very kind of not formative time, but important time. I played it when my daughter was born, and I would have usually I would take the 12:30 feeding of my daughter because everyone else in the house was asleep, and I'd have 3 hours of just nothing to do in a quiet house. So I would just play, like, this is a great time to play Breath of the Wild. So I have a lot of memories tied to that game as well. But I just love how it captures the spirit of Zelda and what Zelda was always meant to be about, which is exploration and finding things. And I think it just captures that beautifully.
It was a very good game. I hold it against no one for saying it's one of their favorites.
No, absolutely not. I mean, and we're talking like, classic against classic, right? If you have like a top 5, top 6 Zelda games, they're all 9.5 out of 10s probably. Like, we're not talking, there's not many degrees of quality there, so they're all pretty consistent.
See, I'd go for my favorite is Majora's Mask.
That's a good pick. It's a good one. I was so taken back by the story and the theming, and how interesting it is as a game. It's a good one. That's, like, again, I said number 3 or 4 depending on the day. It's hard to usurp the Link to the Past, but yeah.
Oh, that's a very strong number 3 for me.
Yep.
I loved Link to the Past. Great memories with that game.
Oh, totally.
But yeah, as far as like the themes go, I think it's obvious to a lot of people, but there's definitely a theme of dealing with death in Majora's Mask. What I didn't realize until I heard some weird theories, every dungeon, like as you go through the story, it's very specifically themed after the 5 stages of grief.
Yes, absolutely. That is definitely. I've heard that before, especially in my research for the show, and yeah, it definitely has a 5 stages of grief. Is very, very evident throughout Majora. Yes.
Now, the reason I probably didn't notice at first is, the first time I played it, I was young. I didn't really know about 5 stages of grief. I still knew the game was very much about death.
Yes. No, and it's exactly, and it's about loss. It's about loss. It's about what do you do with your 72 hours that you have left? If you know you have 72 hours left, what do you do? What kind of impact can you make? And what's really beautiful about the game is that no matter what you do in those 72 hours, when you eventually reset and eventually go back and use it is an ocarina, right?
Yeah.
You reuse the ocarina to go back and to play that Song of Time. Whatever you've done in those 72 hours is now gone. It was for naught. So you have the opportunity, the rare opportunity, to replay 72 hours of the end and make different choices. Or make the same choices, but know what you're doing and do them quicker and get as many good choices in as you can. I think it's a very interesting loop, and tying it to those themes of death and themes of passing and mourning and grief is really, really touching because we can't do that in our regular lives. We can't replay the last 72 hours, but in Majora you can. And the question becomes, what do you do with your 72 hours? Do you help these two people get married? And do you spend your entire 72 hours doing that, knowing that when you reset, it's all gone again? Like, is it worth it for those moments? It's really, I mean, all that theming is just so strong and powerful.
Now, I know a lot of people's contention, like early on when that game first released, it was that time mechanic. Some people hated it.
I couldn't stand it. I never liked a time mechanic growing up. As a kid, I never liked a time mechanic at all. I was never a fan of it. I never enjoyed that mechanic. And I still don't to a certain extent. Like I played Deathloop, for example, and I was not the looping thing just didn't quite work for me. It just didn't quite work. However, I am getting more used to it, especially with my never-ending obsession of Vampire Survivors and the crack dealers at Vampire Survivors continue to just supply new stuff, which means I'm constantly getting back into that cursed game. But I'm getting better at it. But back in those days, I did not. I did not like the idea of if I do something, I don't want it reversed arbitrarily because of this time thing. And I want to make progression. I want to make progress. And I'm still like that to this day. I have a hard time if I lose an hour of progress in a game. Like I'm playing Final Fantasy 8 right now. Final Fantasy 9, and I lost an hour of progress because I got smoked by some enemies. I was not happy. It's like I just burned an hour, and that's an hour of dad time. Can't do that. But I am getting better at that concept of loop. And again, in Majora, it's part of the theming of the story.
Yeah, like I'm weird because I normally don't like time constraints like that. So to this day, I still don't know why exactly it works for me in Majora's where it does in a lot of other games. But yeah, you get me on most others, like roguelikes I'm not often too fond of.
Yeah, I'm not a big roguelikes person either, but for some reason, for some reason the gameplay loop has to get me, and Vampire Survivors is indeed that almost perfect blend. It's so good.
Now in Majora's Mask, did you manage to get the couple's mask?
Yes, I did, and that is one of the most the couple's mask is with, is it Anna or Anya? I forgot the
Kafka.
Kafka, that's it. Yeah.
Wait, it is not Kafka. It is very similar to Kafka.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that's weird bug writer guy.
Yes, that's right. Kafe and Anju. That's it.
Yeah.
Kafe and Anju. Yes, I did. That brought a tear. Like that really did. And I made a point to like look up what I needed to do and do it spoiler free because I was told that that was one to get for a real appreciation. And I'm so glad I did because it is gorgeous. With the last few moments as the moon is crashing down, it was all worth it just for them to have a couple of moments together. It's gorgeous writing. It's gorgeous writing. And the fact that you get to influence that story in a very fun way is fantastic. And that's one of those examples of you have to spend the entire 72 hours doing that. And then you have to let it reset, or else you can't go and just beat the game now. You have to let it reset. It's it's great.
Doing that without a guide back in the day.
I can't imagine. I had to again. I was playing it for one mess up and you're done, and you burned. Talk about burning time. Yeah, I was playing on a deadline, so I was using some help on those things. I was just told like you really have to make sure you do this one, and I'm glad I did.
Oh yeah, like again, I did this back in the day. I didn't use guides or nothing. I was gonna sort that out. I think it took me like 4 or 5 full cycles to finally get that. even then, with all those failed attempts, it is very worth it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. No, it's an amazing expression of love and dedication and devotion. It made me really think about how many things have to go right for an amazing thing to happen. You know, like how many things have to go right. You know, and I really loved that so much. It was really just extremely touching.
I think one thing I do really like about that is, yes, it is very punishing to do that if you don't have a guide to figure it out, but it's never a punishing that makes it feel like it's just jerking you around.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're learning every time you go through the cycle. I think that might be the big one here for me, is why I like this so much, is every failed cycle where you, even if you mess up, you don't get the mask, you don't hit your goal, you're learning things, you're figuring out how this world works, remembering what's happening at different times. It's never really a failed cycle.
Exactly, because you're always, that's a great way of putting it. You're always learning something, you're always discovering something, you're always unlocking something new that you can use in your next run. And I guess that's the joy of a roguelike, you know, where things do reset. That's the whole point, is to have that constant learning loop. So yeah, it's a really great example of that.
That's it. I do think it's actually just for the volume of dungeons, it might actually be shorter than Ocarina, because there's only, what, 4?
Yeah, there's only really 4 main. You're right. There's only 4 main dungeons, because there's those 4 masks that you can get. It's again, those 4 dungeons. You're right. It's like basically 4 dungeons. Correct. Yep. And they're pretty big dungeons. I think sometimes Zelda games are hit and miss on dungeon design. I think Majora's is pretty good for the most part. I don't remember them that carefully, but I remember not loathing them, and them being pretty chunky too.
I think one thing I did also really like in Majora's is, you might not notice it if you've only really played through once. Mm-hmm. Every dungeon boss basically has 2 main strategies to beat it. One of which is playing just as straight Link. The second one being is if you're playing as one of the masked guys. Like, you can fight the very first boss, Odwaja, the weird one in the tree.
Yeah.
Is either Link or is the Deku Scrub. You have 2 completely different ways to fight him.
Yep, and that's great. I always appreciate that. I really did like the one where you have to basically use the Goron mask to, I think you're almost like racing it. You're almost racing something, and you're going around this big circular track. I remember that being a lot of fun, even though I was struggling with the control. I think that was probably one of my favorites. Because Zelda bosses, you're right, can be very hit the glowy weak point 3 times with the item you just got in the dungeon, and yay! And I remember distinctly the enemies, those bosses having a little more to it. Wind Waker is the same. I thought the Wind Waker bosses are actually really good. In my limited time with it.
That would be my second favorite Zelda right there. I loved Wind Waker.
I didn't get around to finishing it for the show. I do want to. I really was charmed by it and I adored it. I don't think I'd rank it top 3 because I haven't finished it. I got maybe halfway through, and then I just had to get the shows done and move on. So, but I do plan on going back to it at some point.
The way I think I described it when me and who did I talk about that with? Still Loading podcast.
Right.
We kind of came to the conclusion, one of the reasons that game holds up so well is it doesn't matter how many times you go back to play Wind Waker. It almost always feels like you're on that adventure for the first time. It's weird. I don't know how the game really accomplished that so well.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. It's a really great game, and I really do appreciate Wind Waker. It's one of those I do need to get back to at some point and polish up. I'll probably start it again because it's been too long now. I need to, probably been a year at least. So. But
yes, with Majora's Mask, I still somewhat dread the boss of the Water Temple. I always had such a hard time with that stupid Water Temple boss.
That's the one where there are these floating platforms, am I right? Or was that Ocarina?
Ocarina is the one that had the 4.
Okay.
That's it. The Ocarina Water Temple boss wasn't a pain. The temple itself was a pain.
Yeah, the temple is it's a lot of backtracking. It's a lot of, and again, with the tax of inventory management, I wonder if that's better in the 3DS versions or I think it's the 3DS versions. I've never played them, but
The 3DS version of Majora's Mask, it's a little off in some ways.
okay.
Like just to describe it in one bit, you have where you're the Deku Scrub. You find that little cave on the side of like the moat. You jump in.
Mhm.
I think that's where you get your hook shot. You go out. You try to jump back on the lily pad. The
Gotcha.
timing is different. So quite frankly, literally in the 3DS version, you exit the cave. If you try to go right to the lily pad, you don't have enough space to build the speed to bounce on the water to the next lily pad. So you have to back up and not enter the cave just enough, and then you can move forward and get to the lily pad.
That's right. Yeah, it's the that big fish. That's right. It's the giant fish. Yeah, that thing I remember being a pain. I remember being like, I knew what I needed to do, but I had a hard time achieving it. And again, it could be just emulation control. Because control is so important.
Yeah, no, it was a pain even on the original 64.
Fair.
That fight was a nightmare. That may have been the hardest fight in Zelda for me, was that stupid fish for any boss. I hate that fish.
I remember I struggle with that fish quite a bit.
But yeah, the 3DS, it's kind of just off in enough ways where it's consistently noticeable. I wouldn't call it a bad port overall, but it's really hard to recommend it over just playing the original. That's kind of been the sad history of Majora's Mask. Its ports have not been good.
Interesting. Okay. So the 3DS one is not great?
Yeah, like some of the visuals look a bit nicer. The aesthetics of the moon changed. Some people were fine with how different the moon looked. I thought it looked goofy in the 3DS. And there's something really that kind of kills that dark atmosphere when the thing just has a goofy face that's coming to crash into everybody.
That's interesting. That's an interesting, yeah.
Again, it's not a bad port, just...
Okay.
I forget what the issues were with the Wii U version, or the Wii version, whichever one you could download from the shop. I forget.
Yeah, it was, well, the Wii one was just, again, I think the original just emulated, and I think it was the fact that it was on a Wii.
Yeah.
And your only option was to play with the classic controller, and that classic controller on the original Wii was not wonderful. It was perfectly fine.
But yeah, it's also, if I remember that version, there was something up with trying to emulate the fog effects in any of the kind of misty areas.
Oh, I never played it long enough to warrant that. I played it very quickly. I don't remember, so I don't have a frame of reference. So.
That's been a problem with the Switch. Like when they first released Ocarina, just on the online, I don't know if you were paying much attention to the discourse around that. You know how
I was not.
But yeah, in the Kakuri Village, you could kind of see like that fog around the outside. You could kind of make out that great Deku tree for it. It couldn't emulate the fog. So the fog was just gone. And you could just see the tree, but it did not look good.
Yeah, but that kind of ruins the lead up, you know, like the big reveal of the Geku tree. Like they used the fog, obviously they had to for technical reasons, but they used it to great effect, and that's a shame.
The emulation they've been using for the games on the Switch for the 64 struggle with the fog, and that's not something you want in a game like Majora's Mask.
No, it's when a game is all atmosphere, you really don't want to skimp on that.
Yeah, I kind of described the treat as something that happened in the Blu-ray release of, I believe it was one of those really old movies, like some of the first colored movies. The Hills Are Alive with the Sound of Music. What was that one from? Was that actually the name? The Hills Are... No, it wasn't called The Hills Are Alive with Sound of Music. That was just the song.
That was the song, yeah. I don't quite recall.
Yeah, but the point in case, they did like a full HD release of it at one point for Blu-ray because they did that with everything. Something interesting to note about the original recording of that movie is it was not recorded in the spring, meaning the grass wasn't actually that green. But they're like, hey, the lower recording, what we can do, they painted the grass. You couldn't tell back then because of the lower quality.
Sure.
The increased quality, you're like, that is obviously painted grass.
That's wild. Okay, I had no idea. That is really funny.
I might be mixing up my movies that happened with. So there might be someone it wasn't The Hills.
I'll accept it as truth. I'll accept it as pure and simple truth. Perfectly fine.
But it was some movie
it is
that
canon for me.
But yeah, it's Majora's Mask just has not had a good official release since the original, and it's a shame.
That is a shame. That is a shame.
It's why one thing I've been happy to see lately is I don't know if you saw much about the N64 recompiled project.
I know there's a physical device coming out. Is that related? Like they actually made an N64?
No.
No? Okay.
Okay, essentially what it is, just as a quick roundup for everyone listening, N64 emulation has kind of consistently sucked compared to any other kind of emulation. Someone a while ago did something called a native port of Ocarina of Time. Native ports to PC for games like that are really hard to do because you effectively have to reverse engineer all of the source code.
Oh, yeah, sure.
A guy basically made this program that automates almost that entire process. What would otherwise be like months to possibly years of work, a couple days can recompile an entire game and get it into code.
That's insane.
The first one he really did this with was Majora's Mask because the full source code for Majora's Mask had leaked a while ago, apparently. I don't know how long ago it was. And if you have the full source code, it's a lot easier, even with this recompiler. So you can find like a native PC port now of Majora's Mask. They even like upscaled the graphics and did all this other stuff. So you can play it as original or with just like the improved graphics and frame rates.
That's cool.
Plays and handles so nice.
That's cool. That's great. I like when that you have that option.
Yeah.
That was not the case when I played it a few years ago. I had to stick with whatever emulator I found. And
I think it was like
that's
2 or 3 months ago this came out.
That's cool.
A little bit longer
That's really
than
cool.
that, but yeah, I'm hoping it'll get more traction because I want to see a lot of those other 64 games that we're probably never going to see come to Switch Online. And
yeah,
their streaming emulation isn't all that great to begin with for the 64.
Very fair.
But yes, if you ever play Majora's Mask again, that's how I suggest doing it.
Yeah, man, definitely. That sounds awesome. That sounds great.
Even lets you remap all of them, so even without a nice C-stick, you can just like do what I do and play it with a PS5 controller.
Yeah, that's probably the best option.
Yeah. But yes, emulation bits aside. No, in my head, wasn't Majora's Mask also on the GameCube's Master Collection?
I don't. Oh, was it? Hang on.
I know
the Master Collection.
Well, I don't think it was called Master Collection because I know there was the Master Quest version of Ocarina of Time that came out on GameCube, where they like redid all the dungeons to make them harder.
Yeah. Thanks for that, by the way. Thanks. Great.
Yeah, I love that version. I like the harder dungeons.
That's cool. That's cool, man.
I'm trying to remember how well that version was though, because I don't know what the collection that came with the 4 Zelda games is called. It's been so many years.
That I don't know. It's been a while. It's been a hot minute.
I remember that being an okay version of Majora's Mask.
Hmm? Yeah.
Considering how little I'm remembering here, I might just be blocking out some bad memories, but...
Could be. You very well could be. You could be completely blocking out some memories.
But yeah, no, like, I think with Majora's Mask also, it did something the older games did that I don't think Ocarina did as well, and that was just being able to find and discover all this stuff just scattered about the world.
That's fair.
Like, all the weird places you could find the different masks. Suddenly coming across the weird dancing ghost on the mushroom things.
Oh, I love that, dude. Oh, all this weird immersion stuff is great. I also love one of my favorite early ones was the hand in the toilet.
that terrified me the first time. So I'm like, what the? No.
What is happening? What is happening? The hand in the toilet was one of my. I'm like, what? I think I was early in the game because you can discover that pretty early on, and that was the moment where I really said, well, even after witnessing the happy mask salesman and his chaos and psychoticness and what is going on with this dude, I was like, what am I playing? Like, what is this game? This is delightfully strange, and I love this so much.
It's why, like, I don't think the theory is accurate, but I do love the theory that the whole game is just Link having a fever dream, because when he falls off that cliff at the beginning, you're like, how did he survive that fall?
Yeah,
I've
heard people. I've heard that that thing, and my take on that is I prefer the game being as designed. Like I prefer it to be very literal, and I prefer it that way. And whether or not that's true or not that's a totally different story.
Yeah. I don't think it was intended as a fever dream, but it makes a lot more sense when people try to say that about Final Fantasy VIII. Because at least there is that theming of the 5 stages of grief. And then there's the idea like almost everything in the game were assets from Ocarina. So this world's built out of all of the stuff coming from Link's memories. It's like, this actually all makes a lot of sense. But did you manage to collect all of the masks?
I collected almost all of them. I think there was one or two that I think are really challenging and I did not get. I'm just trying to remember if I believe I was missing maybe one of them. I think there's a couple that are a real royal pain in the neck to get that I just said, don't need them. But no,
so
actually,
you missed out on the
I'm,
final mask?
No, actually, I did get all of them because I did get up getting the final mask, which made the last boss extremely easy and almost non-competitive. Yes, so I did get all of them. I did.
That's the one thing I don't like about that. It's like, oh, come on.
It really makes the last boss. Yeah, it really so overpowered. You basically cakewalk through the final boss encounter, which is fine. I mean, that's you better have a good reward for all the effort you put in. But so I did get that final mask. Yes, now that I'm thinking it through.
Man, that is by far the coolest looking version of Link, the Fierce Deity mask.
Fierce Deity mask is so good. Fierce Deity Link is so cool. You got the white eyes, white soulless eyes, and really, really, really cool.
Weird twisted sword.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, it's very, very, very cool.
Just that slick, silvery design.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. It is extremely cool. That whole ending of the game is fantastic. That whole theming of you're in this you have to give up all these masks that you have to give them up in order to get to the heart of it was just again so good. It's a wonderful game.
Now, out of all the actual areas, because you find out each one of those masks you wear, they're transforming you into the different races of Hyrule.
Yep.
They're not just these magic masks. They're the spirits of actual people who were alive at some point.
Yeah, they were. The spirits of the people who wore them. They are. It's very much so Breath of the Wild, kind of like they give you their powers almost,
Yeah, but it's really creepy when you start to think about it, because you play the Song of Healing for people in these different situations, but you're not bringing them back to life.
You're actually kind of reliving their death. You get to experience what those final choices were, but you also are bringing them closure. And I what I like about that is the Song of Healing isn't going to bring them back to life, but it's going to provide them a bit of peace, even posthumously, which is really interesting and cool.
It is a little dark when you think oh, now he's at peace and rest. Now I'm just going to go run around as the Goron chief, and everyone's going to think I'm him, not knowing he's already dead. It's
really it's very, very, very touching. I remember I think Majora is the one where with the Zora, they're in the band. Is that right?
Yeah.
And then you have to sing, and the Zora's in the the you have to get the singer doesn't have her voice anymore. That stuff's just cool. Just really, really cool and impactful. Way more impactful than anything I thought it was in Ocarina. I like Ocarina just fine. It doesn't rank in my top, maybe in my top 10.
I'm with you there.
There are 9 more Zelda games I'd rather play than Ocarina. Just saying. It's fine. I don't adore it. I didn't play it as a kid, so I don't have that nostalgic for it, but
I put it in my top 10. It's good.
Okay. I probably would too, and if I had to do a proper top 10, I should do a top 10. That's what podcasters do, right? They do top 10 things. I should do a ranking at the end of my I should maybe I'll do that with the Final Fantasy series when I'm done with it. Whenever that happens, which will be never, because I'm never gonna be done with that series. I should probably do a ranking episode, because everyone loves a good ranking episode. I never do that. Maybe I'll find somebody else's show to do it on.
Just find a bunch of clips of it, of other people ranting about the ones you also don't like, and just use those clips to your rankings.
Yeah.
You should have enough with me on Final Fantasy VIII for that.
Final Fantasy VIII is gonna be very spicy. I really want to just make it one episode, but I don't think it's gonna happen. Oh, that's funny.
I will say though, in relation to the Zora, I now have a counter to one of the stupidest jokes.
Okay.
Because I first heard the joke back in Dragon Ball Z when Tien tries to make a joke, but it's, you can tune a piano, but you can't tune a fish.
Oh, wow.
The Zora's got a fish guitar. He tunes that. You can tune a fish.
You can tune a fish. That's it. That's fair. I respect that. I respect that thought process.
The horrible dad jokes. I love them.
That's great. That's great. I love it. I think that's very, very good.
I do like how every mask you change into changes your instrument as well.
Yep. Which is very cool. It's a very fun idea. Again, I love how Zelda's always incorporating music into its games and has for, since the first one. I mean, the first one you had in the first Zelda game, you had a whistle that could transport you to other places or dry up lake beds, so you could access, Dungeon 8 in the first quest. Zelda's always incorporated music in its games, and I think not just obviously the incredible soundtracks, which of course is world-class soundtracks, but just in the game itself. They all have done that to some extent. I'm just going through them one by one, and for the most part, they all have. I don't remember if there's any music elements in Twilight Princess. It's a game I don't love.
I like Twilight Princess. It's fine.
Yeah,
I enjoyed it.
It's fine. It's not very memorable for me.
I will say it probably had my favorite final fight with Ganon.
Yes,
just
I
from
do
a
remember
sheer cinematic point of, you go from fighting as the beast, you fight on the horseback, all this burning stuff, and it ends not with like the grand spectacle, but it's just you and Ganon sword fight.
Very cool. Yeah, no, it is a very good final encounter.
Rest of the game's just okay.
It's fine. It's one of those where it's like, it's okay.
But how would you actually rank the Majora's Mask soundtrack compared to some of the other Zelda games?
I'd have to think about the soundtrack and then really listen to it. I always figure like Zelda music and the soundtracks of Zelda are almost kind of like Final Fantasy. They're all almost one giant, you know what I mean? Like, because they're different and interesting, but there's so many recurring themes to them. It's hard for me to separate them. I would say Majora's soundtrack is upper third, I would say. But for me, it wasn't the most memorable part of it, like other Zelda games.
See, I know Zelda lot more than Final Fantasy will reuse tracks and just kind of modify them. So I think there's a much more consistent sound from like the first Zelda, even all the way up to Tears of the Kingdom, than even like Final Fantasies 4 to 5.
No, that's fair. No, that's actually a very good point. No, it's an excellent point. And actually, I'll back off that a little bit. You're right. When I think about Zelda games and Zelda music, it's very much so this one cohesive thing. You're right. Final Fantasy definitely has changed over the years and changed composers and things like that. So yeah, it's probably not congruent to a Final Fantasy, but my original point I think still stands that Zelda music doesn't say all sound the same. It's all the same kind of vein. You know.
See, I'd put Majora's Mask over, but it's not by much, and it's purely for two songs. One is the Song of Healing. I've actually been slowly learning how to play the ocarina. It's been a very slow process. Song of Healing is a very simple and easy song to play, but no matter what you do, it sounds somewhat haunting and unnerving in a way.
Interesting.
I've got 4 or 3 different tones of ocarina, like a bass, tenor, not soprano, but the other one. But point in case, it doesn't even matter the key you're playing in. It's unnerving and off-putting to a degree. It is also somewhat soothing. It's a very weird mix of emotions you hear from that. But the best song, Stone Temple Tower.
Stone Temple Tower. I gotta look that up.
It's the 4th dungeon, the Stone Temple, the only one you don't get a new mask for. It is so haunting. There's like an epic orchestral version of it you can find on YouTube, and it is glorious.
Cool, I'll have to check it out. I'm gonna listen to it right now. Oh, okay. I found a 30-minute version of it. I don't need 30 minutes. Yeah, no, that's a great track. Oh, I'm just caught a few seconds of it. Yes, that's a really good one.
Oh, it's
for
my
sure.
favorite track in all of Zelda. It is
Wow,
so good.
that's high marks.
It is.
That's high marks. That's crazy. Good call. That's an excellent one. The song Healing though is so beautiful. That is probably my favorite track in Majora for sure.
I'm actually trying to think now. What Zelda soundtrack really stands out compared to the rest?
Sorry, say that again.
So I'm trying to think of what Zelda soundtracks like really stand out in some ways compared to the other. Because I did say that earlier. It's kind of like one type of sound the whole way through. But it wasn't until I said that I'm like, huh. I don't know if I could necessarily name which games certain songs come from, with a couple exceptions.
That's fair. For me, it's more of a situation where I think like Breath of the Wild, and again, I haven't played Tears of the Kingdom yet, but I will. Breath of the Wild, because of how varied it is and how it will change based on the scenario and situation. And again, a lot of Zelda games have done that. It's pretty distinctive. But again, they're all very similar themes and similar styles. You know, the Gorons are always going to be crunchy, you know, and the Zoras are always going to be, you know, they all have their themes, right? And I think it's very cozy in that regard. So Zelda music kind of mixes together for me quite a bit.
Now, I don't know if you listened to the guy who made like a bunch of his earlier stuff like video game parody, but Nate Wants to Battle.
I don't know that. I don't know Nate Wants to Battle.
Yeah, like he just uses his real name these days, Nathan Sharp. He doesn't really do the video game music stuff anymore, but he made an album called Songs of Time. Every song on it is like starting from the beginning to end of the story of Ocarina of Time.
Okay.
It starts off kind of like a little poppy, little folksy music. Then you get some rock, but when it gets to like the adult timeline for Ocarina, it just goes like metal.
That's cool.
It is such a good album. I might send you the link later. I think he has the whole thing up on his YouTube too.
That's cool. That's very cool.
But yes, for anyone who just likes musical Zelda stuff, like all the songs are like sampling stuff from Ocarina of Time. We're at about an hour of recording. So do you have any notable thoughts about Majora's Mask we haven't touched upon yet?
Honestly, no, man. I what I love about Majora is, again, I think it's such an achievement of theming and storytelling, and it's a beautiful marriage of, again, that gameplay that they established in Ocarina, and I don't want to say perfected, but continued in Majora with all these different great new additions with your masks again, and all of these different gameplay elements. It's a weird game that doesn't seem to fit in the Zelda timeline. Like when you look at the world of The Legend of Zelda, it's a weird outlier. Like that's a weird outlier. Like Wind Waker's a weird outlier because of its tone. It's just a weird game, Link's Awakening, and I love when Zelda goes outside of its comfort zone. And again, there are some side stories in Majora that I just absolutely love and were very touching and effective.
I'm just glad to know people who never really played it will go back and still love it just as much. I can sit here and go, it's not just the nostalgia. It's not just because I played it when it came out. It is that good of a game.
It's not just the nostalgia. I totally agree. I think it's a game that holds up well, and I'm an example of that. I did not play this as a kid. I played it, 2 years ago because I had to for a podcast series, and I was smitten by it, and I continue to be smitten by it.
Well, with that, thanks for stopping by my show again. It's been a pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, man, always fun. Thanks for having me again. I appreciate it, and I'd love to come back to talk more games. I will eventually finish Final Fantasy IX at some point in my life, and we'll talk about Final Fantasy IX.
Yeah, whenever that happens. I'll wait till you're done with it on your series, because I'm sure you'll be sick of talking about it after a month.
That's a very good point. Yeah, you may want to give me some time.
I mean, I talked Final Fantasy IX with someone else earlier, so I probably need to give it time on my channel too.
That's fair. That's totally fair. We'll have to do it again sometime, though, man. This is always a good time. I appreciate you having me.
Well, again, everyone, thanks for stopping in. Go ahead and go on over to Gamer Looks at 40s podcast over on Podbean. I'll have links to all that in the description. It's a blast to check that out, especially if you like Final Fantasy, since there's going to be a lot of Final Fantasy on his channel in the coming months.
And I did 3 episodes on Majora's Mask, which now, considering the Final Fantasy series, seems very quaint, considering I did 8 episodes of Final Fantasy VI.
Did it get up to 8 episodes?
It did. It was up to 8 episodes on Final Fantasy VI, and Final Fantasy VII will probably be 8 as well. Can't help it. It's an important game. Like, it's just important. There's some cool stories in there, and yeah, definitely check it out. It's a neat thing. If you go to agamerlooksat40.com, so agamerlooksat4040.com, or just search it on Google, the website comes up. There's a section for full series playlists where you can go and binge an entire series. So you can binge the entire Zelda series in one go, in one place. So you don't have to hunt around your pod player of choice to find it. It's all right there in one playlist. So Gamer Looks at 4040, wherever you listen to your favorite, or hopefully in my case, 8th favorite podcast. I'm super good with me being your 8th favorite show, because that means, like, that's great. Out of all the things you do, I'm your 8th favorite. That's actually pretty impressive. I'll take it. So yeah, man. Thanks again.